It's not often you see a game release and get shut down within a few days, yet it's happened twice within a year. First with a scam that was the day before, and now with Concord, a game that has costed Sony a staggering $15 million a week. It's a sad trend that's seemingly starting to become more commonplace as companies try to chase the perpetual money printer live service dream. I don't personally think Concord's failure is entirely the devs' fault either, since they're just doing the job. There are far more factors at play here, although more on that later. Concord is the newest live service hero shooter developed by the people at Firewalk Studios, a studio helmed by veterans of Bungie and Activision. The game was funded and published by Sony, who had quite the track record in terms of live service games this year on both swings of the pendulum. Almost immediately from their inception in 2018 as a sub-company, Sony had their eyes on them, wanting them to develop a AAA game for them to publish on the PS5. They accepted the offer with no qualms. Work was already commencing on the shooter, they had high hopes for the project. It was set to be the next big thing, to rival the likes of Overwatch. In 2023, Sony outright bought the company for an amount I don't have an answer for. In May that same year, the game was revealed, titled Concord, an all-new hero shooter similar in style to Overwatch, with zany characters and a bright and poppy art style, slated to release in August 2024. This is where people's doubts started setting in. Right from the get-go, people were not amazed by it. By this point, hero shooters and live service fatigue was really setting in, and it didn't look particularly interesting either, just another hero shooter aimed at riding a trend, but without any of the flair that Overwatch had. The characters looked particularly bland, and none of them really stood out at all. It didn't help that the funding figures and development time was public information, adding fuel to the fire that would lead to their eventual end. $100 million was spent on this project, spread across 8 years of total development time. Those numbers lead to big expectations. That's the entire budget of last year's Oppenheimer, or Robert Downey Jr.'s salary for playing Dr. Doom. The game was too expensive to open to low sales. They hoped it'd hit the ground running and be the next hot game that everyone's playing. They overestimated their appeal, a blunder being an understatement. Its release was rocky to say the least. Critics rated it with pretty low to average scores all across the board, citing it as uninspired, playing it safe and not really bringing anything new to the table. Its resemblance to Overwatch didn't exactly help its sales either. Since Overwatch is free, why would you pay £40 for a game that you can essentially play for free, and is a better product? Charging for this game was its first big mistake in my opinion. A live service game that is paid entry is it's a hard sell in this day and age. You're shooting yourself in the foot. Saying that, they have every right to do so. It's just far too risky in my opinion when you consider the competition are all free-to-play titles. The initial critic reviews, as much as people may hate them and say that they don't matter, they do shape the outcome of a game's success. Remember how Alien Isolation got 5? And it's quite literally the best horror game ever made. Thanks IGN. Concord had a foot in death's door from release, with the other mid-step, selling just over a few thousand copies, Steam charts indicating that it peaked at 700 players total. It was on track to be a catastrophic failure. The game performed poorly for just under 2 weeks when Sony decided to finally pull the plug. On September 3rd, they announced that the game would be closing down just 2 weeks after launch due to poor sales and a largely negative reception. Refunds will be given to those who bought it, and it'll cease to exist after that. $100 million in budget and the work of 150 employees, all down the drain with nothing to show for it. A situation I personally would hate to be in, I don't know about you. I do feel bad for Firewalk in the future, which I don't see lasting much longer sadly. I mentioned earlier that I don't think the shortcomings of this game can be entirely attributed to them, and I still believe that. I think Sony ultimately had to blame for most of its issues outside of its initial development. Whilst it's not entirely the studio's fault for its failure, part of it definitely is, since they designed and made it. I think the only way I could describe its design is safe and dull. There's nothing really unique about it, from the bog standard characters to the gunplay and mechanics. It all just looks bland, with nothing to put itself ahead of its rivals. The case for its bad publicity is also harmed when a developer goes out of the way to insult people who voice their opinions on it. That just makes people dogpile on you and your product even more. I understand wanting to take it personally and defend your own work, but sometimes it's better to just sit back and move on, for your own sanity. Sony's involvement hasn't exactly been all sunshine and rainbows for its release either. I already talked about the egregious pricing, which I believe was the final nail in the coffin. If the game was free to play then, people would be more inclined to just try it out. Barely anyone played the beta when that was out, an indicator of what was to come maybe. People don't want to part with the cash and try something that they might not like. They want a guarantee that the money won't be wasted, and Sony didn't convince anyone. I'm sure they had the reasonings for charging money for the game. All games exist to make money. Charging up front is a way of guaranteeing income, rather than relying on microtransactions to make up the bulk of the revenue. Clearing 100 million though? That's a huge number, more than what Spider-Man 2018 cost to make, and that had the Marvel licensing fee. I struggled to see where the 100 million was put here. The CEO doesn't seem to have a classic car collection, nor do the graphics look anything special. Sony seemed to throw money at this like it was a surefire hit, without considering diminishing returns and the risks associated with ballooning the cost to astronomical limits. Sony's live service games have been fairly hit and miss this year. You've seen what's happening with Destiny 2, marathons in shambles, and who can forget the Helldivers controversy. Sony seemed to be great at fumbling live service games, but excel in single players. That's their bread and butter. Do you recall seeing any advertising for this game? I don't. Maybe I'm not around enough to see sponsored streams or whatever, but people already in the know shouldn't be who you're advertising to. You need to bring in new people. That's what I find baffling. A game that has mass appeal and needs to make back a ton of profit, just released into the wild to fend for itself with little to no advertising. It's confusing. Sony dropped the ball all around here. If you ask me, everything they do is played too safe now. It's all following trends and sticking to established franchises, out of only wanting to show a green arrow in the quarterly earnings call to please shareholders. The executives are so blinded by money that they forget that trends come and go. The ship for Overwatch clone sold years ago. Free-to-play live service is the play now. People want new things, not a trend-jack product that's outdated by the time it releases. I don't doubt that Sony cut costs elsewhere to make space for this gargantuan failure. The closure of Japan Studios, for example, they got absorbed out of not being profitable. Their next game could have been amazing, could have sold millions, but we'll never know now. They could have guaranteed millions and millions if they funded a Bloodborne remaster, but no, that's too safe and profitable, even for Sony. Concord's production and release as a whole is a case of out-of-touch executives, mixed with how scope creep and massive budgets are unsustainable for the industry, topped with a bad first impression that isn't memorable whatsoever. It's a masterclass in how not to release a AAA game. I can see this game being canned so Sony can write off as a loss on the books. At least the devs got paid, since that's all that matters. I do fear for the studio's future though, if we consider the contemporaries' fates. It's not looking bright for them. Either that or the game will get a relaunch where it's free to play. Although I do wonder if it would be too risky at this point due to its already tarnished reputation, and it basically becoming a joke at this point. In this situation, no one wins, and that's just how it goes. Tomorrow's never fair,